All right, we'll get going with some introductions, and I'm sure many others will join as the conversation progresses. So welcome to this very special measurement and evaluation panel session, where we'll get to hear from some three communication leaders across government, corporate and agency on what it takes to build a measurement culture and speak the language of the C-suite. I'm Paul Cheel, and for those of you who don't know me, as well as 2 decades in corporate and financial communication agencies, I'm also the managing partner of the Communication Dividend, a measurement and data analytics platform specifically designed for the PR and communication profession. I'm a passionate advocate for measuring the value of communication, so I'm extremely pleased to be presenting this Public Relations Institute of Australia webinar as part of the Global Measurement Month suite of activities coordinated by AMEC and supported by PRIA's Education Community Committee. Firstly, I want to honour and pay respects to the Gadigal people, custodians of the land where I am located, and the First Nations custodians across Australia. We acknowledge and recognise the significance of our shared history. We support the continued connection of First Nations people to country, and we are committed to further strengthening relationships between First Nations and First Nations people and non-First Nations people. This measurement month, we are focusing on measuring what matters. And for those of us who have had to report on the performance of our comms and PR programs to the C-suite, you know it can be a pretty intimidating place to be, where nothing matters more than presenting what matters. Today, we'll hear from 3 of Australia's public relations thought leaders who will be sharing their different perspectives from corporate, government and agency on how they've built or are building a measurement culture so you can confidently and competently have those C-suite conversations. Joining us today are Simon Madry, who's the Communication Manager for Australia and New Zealand from McKinsey & Co. From enterprise to startup, Simon has shaped communications campaigns that have spread ideas, elevated brands, shifted products, and distinguished individuals. He's worked in numerous agency and in-house roles, both here and in the UK, including Amazon Web Services, BAE Systems, Google, Microsoft, and National Australia Bank. Simon's current role sees him shape and drive integrated communication campaigns for McKinsey & Co.'s technology and digital practice and service lines across Australia and New Zealand. Also on our panel today is Craig Baddings from Senate SHJ. Craig has over 30 years experience advising major corporations and senior executives in Australia and South Africa on their reputation in good times and bad. Much of that time has been spent working in the trenches with boards, management teams and in-house communication teams, assisting them with their purpose, issues and crisis preparation and management, media coaching and media relations, communication strategy, social media strategy, and thought leadership. He's passionate about exploring the multifacets of reputation and especially how corporate culture often causes the biggest reputational risks. And third on our panel is Chris Hollindrake. He's the Manager, Communication Engagement, Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. Chris is a communication and engagement specialist with a background in science and marketing. He's worked on a range of biosecurity programs in Queensland and now leads the communication engagement strategy for the National Fire Ant Eradication Program. His professional areas of interest include digital communication, data visualization, and social marketing. Thank you all for joining me on this measurement webinar. Let's get into it. So, and before I do, actually, there is a Q&A box on the side of the panel. Please do add some questions. We'll have some time at the end to go through those. So add your questions into the Q&A box as we go. So every year in Australia, organisations spend more than $500 million in public relations activities. Yet how much of this activity is delivering value and where is the proof? The global pandemic has fundamentally reshaped the communication profession, with communications becoming more materially important to the C-suite than ever before. So now we have this seat at the table that we've been longing for. How do we talk the language of executives and demonstrate the tangible value that we know we offer? So Simon, I might kick off with a question for you. What are some of the challenges you've encountered when discussing measurement with the C-suite, or in your case with partners, and how have you overcome those?
Thank you, Paul. And as we kick off, I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting. I'm going to do the most consultant thing possible, which is by reframing the question and answering instead of like the challenges, because there's as many challenges as there are situations, right? I think it's really about the opportunity, and what I've learned through agency and in-house roles is that it's really about understanding the individual. Ultimately, we are dealing with individuals, whether they be decision makers or other stakeholders, and really their motivations and drivers and how even they are personally measured, and framing my interactions based on that. So in one of my practice areas at the moment, I've got 3 stakeholders within one practice area, and each senior stakeholder is driven by a different motivator. One is by commercials, one is by brand, and one is about the people. And each has a different level of understanding when it comes to communications and what we can do. I even had one senior partner ask, what do you mean by reputation? What does reputation mean? And in our world, we kind of go, oh, well, it means this, and you kind of stumble because you just kind of take it for granted. So I guess it's really about taking the time to understand individual stakeholders, understand or ask the dumb questions, because the assumption for us sometimes is that they are thinking about comms as much as we are. I did some back of the envelope math once and worked out if a partner is doing a half-hour call with me once a week and working 50 hours a week, he or she's only really dedicating 1% of their time to comms. I'm dedicating 100% of my time to comms. So how am I going to use that 1% of the time as impactful as possible? Ask them the hard questions. Even why do you want this report? Why do you want this event? Why do clients need to hear about this now? But also shifting my own mindset. So it's not all about educating the partners, educating myself. 15 years of agency has conditioned me to drive volume, coverage. I'm now in an environment where a partner says, too busy, can't do that AFR interview. And I'm like, really? Please? But then I have to think about, why that broadcast channel might not be advantageous for them as well. So really, individual motivations, education, dumb questions.
And what about you, Chris, from a government perspective? What are those challenges, or some would say, what are the opportunities there?
Look, I think it's similar to what Simon's saying. It's really understanding what are the drivers for the people who are leading, I guess, the direction of the work that we're doing. So from a government perspective, we're looking to elected representatives that are forming government, have commitments on work and initiatives that need to be delivered, which are then delivered by the department. And there's often a bit of almost a lag time between the government and then the department itself. So as a comms and engagement practitioner, being able to have a very high level understanding of what the government is trying to achieve, and being able to understand and talk the language that they talk helps to design our sort of measurement and evaluation framework. I guess one of the things that really challenges us is the need for demonstrating quick results. So governments operate on a 3 or 4 year cycle for elections and delivering on commitments. And often the initiative starts and I need to deliver results or show results in a month, 2 months, 6 months, whereas a lot of what are the initiatives are being implemented are behavior change programs that can take many years to actually see the impacts of. So it's being able to demonstrate that our activities right now are contributing to that sort of longer term vision. And that's a challenge. Everyone knows there has to be quick wins, but it's making sure those quick wins are heading in the right direction and making it clear that that's what we're doing.
Yeah, awesome. We'll come back to that point. But before we do, Craig, from an agency perspective, you have to have this conversation with lots of clients. What are the challenges you see in talking measurement and evaluation with clients?
Yeah, I suppose in a way I've had the fortune of decades of these discussions. And I put it down to 2 things. The one is confusion, the other is myopia. But let me explain that. So for context, when it comes to confusion, only between 1980 and 2000, there were 15 different PR measurement models. and I can't count how many have been subsequent to that, right? So that's the confusion piece. It's like, what is there? What can we use? How do we use it? And everybody uses different models. And yeah, thank goodness we've got the Barcelona principles, because that's pretty sound and it's a good starting point. But the myopia is, and Simon touched on it, is this focus on media. I think it's an incredibly one-sided measurement tool. And it's incredible how many clients are still hooked up on media, share of voice, how many articles. And in fact, some even go to, well, how many press releases are you going to write a month? And I just want to crawl under the table. But some of the challenges at a C-suite, at that level is there's no link to the C-suite, so the objectives of the business. And some people, it's almost like a tick box exercise. They sort of go, well, if we do this campaign, we'll get the measurement media, and then we'll move on, and we've got lots to do, so we don't need to measure anything else. So that's that myopic measurement. And some clients just don't have the budget, quite frankly. They don't want to spend money on measuring. They want to spend money on doing and producing. And that, you'll be amazed at how big an issue that is, actually. Is trying to get budget to measure, because look, it does cost. So those are the challenges that we see, and it is an education. You have to showcase what can be done, how it can be done, and what the benefits you can derive from doing it the right way.
So how do you do that, Craig? Because I imagine not many clients have heard of the Barcelona principles, right? So it's a hard place to start.
It is. The Barcelona principles are one thing, and anybody on this call who isn't aware of them should look that up. I'm not going to go into the detail of that now, but fundamentally, there's 7 key principles that they cover. And look, and everyone listening, I wasn't paid by Paul to give this plug, but I've got to mention the communication dividend, right? Only because we recently took it on board and we're using it with a client, and it's fantastic. And why do I say that? Because for the first time in my life in this industry, I've found a tool that can measure not just the PR element, but it gives us oversight to everything: marketing, EDMs, social and digital, customer service, and you name it. You can plug in so many variables into this dashboard. And why is that important? Well, because the problem with measurement often is it's siloed. Now with this dashboard that we have through the communication dividend, we're able to get access to and see a lot more that the client's doing, which allows us to be a lot more strategic in what advice we're giving and what PR campaigns we put forward or not. And the integration becomes really important across all of the disciplines: sales, marketing, CRM, media, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what I love about that. And for the first time, I've found something that can integrate. So, Paul, good plug for you, but I'm only saying that because it really does work.
But you're right. The thing about measurement, it doesn't have to be at the end of a campaign, right? It's also about improving what you're doing day to day as you're going. So it doesn't need to be this thought of us. It's just to see if we were successful or not. It's actually improving the process. So Simon, how do you overcome that idea that we're more than just media now, and what we're doing, as you say, is a bigger reputation? We're focused on a corporate reputation, and that's more than just media. How do you have those discussions with partners? As you say, mainly spend 1% of their week on this.
Yeah, so I mean, it's about creating that measurement culture within the team, whether it's in agency or McKinsey. It's measuring every day. It's not waiting for that weekly report or that monthly report where you get that dread of having to build up the KPIs and, oh, quick, we've got a week to go and we've got to hit these. It's about having those, because particularly in a corporate setting, you don't have levers like timesheets or budgets to pull when you're resourcing or doing activity. The fable is you come in-house and it's easy and it's, take a leave for your massages and all that. It's like, no, it's not. We work really long hours. But what measurement allows you to do is it allows you to say, no, that request from this partner or this business unit doesn't contribute to what we've identified as our most impactful work. Or say, when somebody comes to you, with an ask, let's reframe this in a way that we can build it into our strategic work stream. And this happens a lot with McKinsey when it comes to knowledge. One of our biggest products is the knowledge, the articles that we publish. And so somebody comes to us and says, I'd like to publish this. And we say, this is really good. If we tweak this element, we can bring it into this strategic priority. It'll get you more resources and so on and so forth. So practically what that means is doing all the trackers that everyone will be used to, and that Craig is just helpfully plugged, everything from event attendance to view rates. But really, it's about entrepreneurship and creating or finding the data sets that work for, again, the individuals that we've mentioned previously. One of our key publications is the AFR. For McKinsey, and often we get the ask to place an op-ed. We know inherently as communicators, well, that's a really high bar. How do we go about doing that? We sat down and analysed a month's worth of op-eds and right, who is writing these? What are the key elements? And we're actually able to identify that 25% came from journalists, either from the AFR or outside. 25% came from academic institutions, and the rest was made up of everyone else, of which I think 12% was private sector. Now, this is months ago, so nobody kind of quote me on this. It probably needs to be redone. But having those data sets allowed me to have conversations with partners who said, I'd love to do an op-ed. And I said, that's great. Your chance is about 1 in 6. And even if we do crack through that barrier, these are the elements of what makes for a compelling op-ed: the opinion, the data, X, Y, Z. So that 1 or 2 hours we invest in doing that analysis, having that entrepreneurship to go, that'd be really helpful to do, saved many conversations and allowed us to have much more strategic conversations with many partners in the subsequent months.
And Chris, you mentioned something in your first response around having a measurement framework. I think it'd be great to explore that a bit more as a way to tackle these challenges we have, right? So what does that mean for you and in the role you have about, and how did you go about that, building a measurement framework that I guess gives a bit of a roadmap about what we're going to measure and why?
Yeah, I guess I was probably just reflecting on sort of my journey in the sort of measurement and evaluation space, and probably about 8 years ago, I attended a webinar not too dissimilar to this one here, where someone presented on this amazing framework they had that aligned everything their entire team did to these common strategic priorities, and it looked so simple, it looked so elegant and perfect, and I sort of thought, wow, that's amazing. I don't have one of those. I think I really should be a little bit more strategic in what I'm doing. So I sort of did a look around, and I came across the AMEC framework. So it seems to be quite common these days. A lot of people are using it. It's so straightforward and simple, and it basically breaks down all of my team or anyone's team communication engagement work from the very beginning, every activity that we do, every output, every piece of reach or social media post, all the way through impacts and outcomes, and it aligns things very neatly. It takes a bit of work to set up. I'd say I'm still like 8 years in, I'm still just beginning, it feels like, on the journey to developing sort of my understanding of measurement and evaluation. But I thought probably one thing in terms of making it work and how it works as part of my team and the team culture. And it's an all-in, So basically it doesn't work if it's just 1 or 2 people doing it. It needs to be everyone as a part of this framework and a part of this process. We sort of have a bit of a message in our team that basically it didn't happen if you didn't measure it. So basically, whatever you do, if you don't measure it, you don't record it somewhere and report on it, then we assume that it didn't happen. It's a bit, it's not quite that simple, but it just forces people to make sure they're accountable for their work and they have an opportunity to put their work forward for people to see. And within our framework, they can see that it's contributing to the important stuff. So anyway, interesting thought.
So that leads to my next question. I'll stick with Chris. So what's the benefit and the value of having that framework in place when you're having conversations with the C-suite? What does that allow you to do? And how does it allow you to, I guess, explain why we're doing what we're doing, what you're doing?
Like anyone, it's always looking for additional resources and funding to do more of the work that we know that we want to do. And I think, like was mentioned before, it takes a lot of, I guess, two things. One, it helps to show that all of this investment is contributing to the things that we want. Those outcomes, the really important outcomes in my space, are behavior change programs across, community or an industry group. They take a lot of time, and we look at, small percentages in change annually, which means that the actual outcome doesn't happen for 4, 5, 10 years. But by having the framework, it makes it clear for the minister or whoever's approving the funding for the piece of work that I'm doing. They can see that X funding is aligned perfectly, is aligned to the objectives that we are committed to doing. So it's almost a communication piece really for us. And I guess when I look at the opportunities we have to communicate at that high level, it's usually a very short amount of time. So I need a way to communicate that all of this funding is going to deliver what you want, and I need to have it basically in a one-pager, and they can see, yeah, that makes sense. It's a logical approach. I'm confident that this funding will be used correctly.
Yeah, great. Craig, do you have any examples where you've brought in measurement and have made a difference from a client perspective?
Yeah, I suppose two very different ones. One was we're in the middle of a crisis with a major Australian brand, and forgive me, I can't mention who they are, to the extent where we had literally 5 partners across our firm working on this. And there was tension between the board wanting to act on what was in the media and the executive team saying, no, there's a risk in acting too soon. So what we did is we ran telephone surveys overnight. This company is based across all the states of Australia. And so from a measurement perspective and a reaction perspective, what we wanted to measure was what impact was the coverage having on their members? Was it impacting them in terms of reputation, trust in the brand, their propensity to leave the brand and go somewhere else? And we ran literally for a number of weeks overnight in different states, sort of evaluation and research on that, which then informed our response. And we could then prove to the board through this measurement and this research that actually the knee-jerk reaction of getting out on the front foot with the media and responding to what they were saying was the wrong way to go. And the engagement piece behind the scenes through EDMs, direct contact, client service was the right way to go. And that measurement allowed us to then prove a point and change the strategy and appease the board. That's one. The other, and it all comes back to why. Why are you doing this campaign, and what do you want that audience to think, feel, and do? And that think, feel, and do becomes critical. And that's why I have a problem, and always have had a problem with measurement in PR, is because we measure the wrong things very often. Not anymore so much, but we used to. That myopic focus on media, for example. This particular client, again, I can't mention them, but it was to do with COVID. And it was, what was land, and it was all social media and reaction to media articles and social media commentary and feelings and behavior online. And we had a whole team looking at that intensely during the second wave of COVID. Specifically for the reason of being able to advise on wording in the narrative, how wording was landing, how people were reacting to that wording, and then whether we needed to change that narrative and how we needed to change it. And there were some incredible learnings out of that. I may go into them in a little bit later, but that fundamentally allowed us to inform the client about what, by postcode, what people were feeling, what they were saying, how they were reacting, what the main sentiments were, which messages were landing and really generating a positive response, and therefore being able to reflect that back and change our language, our narrative, how often we went out and which channels we used. And that was a think, feel, do behavioral analysis using social media, but also looking at things like emoticons, literally going to that sort of level of detail. So that's measurement that I think really works and drives real insights to enable you to change your campaign. So they're two very different examples.
To your earlier point, I mean, I guess there's a cost to that, right? Time and monetary cost to investing in that, and it takes a client who's willing to do that. But it obviously empowered you to give much better advice than you would have been able to do otherwise.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things I said in my first point was cost is often an issue. Getting budget to do this stuff is often an issue, but it can be critically important.
What about you, Simon? Have you seen this where you've been able to bring in measurement solutions and then kind of make a difference and be able to kind of give that advice at a much more strategic level?
Yeah, and not just myself, but teams. I'm a big believer in, every single member of the team, from the most junior to the most senior, really understanding the objectives and why we're going for something. And there's a mind shift. And if there's like a message that I'd love for people to take away is that you can view measurement as a handcuff or as a key. And what I mean by that is a lot of people are scared by measurement. They feel trapped by it, but it's really an opportunity. So for a coordinator or an account executive, you've got those coverage targets you've got to hit, you're hitting the phones, but you've got limited time, limited resources, limited data sets, whatever it is. So how can I get creative to hit those targets? But also what it allows you to do, particularly in those junior roles, is say no, which I know is really scary when you're in a junior role. When you're really focused and you know what you need to do, if another request comes which is lower priority, you can say, I'm sorry, I'm focused on this right now. And then as you get more senior, the trick is that you can set the objective before it's set for you. So as you become that senior advisor or that close counsel, you say, actually, this is the measure I feel we should be going for, and this is the target we should set, the number, the percentage, whatever it may be. And as soon as you start thinking in that way, it just unlocks your career, your relationships, your programs. So it's really about that mindset. Almost the topic of this webinar is changing that culture within the team. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, part of that, and it leads to my next question. Just a reminder to everyone to pop any questions you have into the Q&A. But it kind of brings to that point, right, which is where words people, not numbers people, right? And I think often, especially more junior levels, would be afraid to dive into that data. But so it brings me to my question, and I'll start with you, Simon. What advice would you have for those in-house? How do they start this? Where do they start? How do they have this discussion internally and start to begin, a measurement culture?
We're communicators, so learn the language of your stakeholders. For the decision maker, it often means understanding the commercials, PR, comms, and marketing. We are a support function to the commercial goals of an organization. And if anyone says anything else, it's sure, but I firmly believe it. So ask the questions to really understand what those goals are, but also understand the threats. And one of my favorite questions to ask is, why do we lose business? When you lose, why is it? And it's really fun sometimes to ask that of a senior stakeholder. And then again, it unlocks a whole kind of conversation, because it is our role to have that one foot in the real world and just sometimes just call it and just go, maybe that's what it is. Now, sometimes it's out of PR or comms control. Rates or capability can be a limiting factor to winning that business. But if it's an issue of awareness or perception, and you unlock that through the conversation, that's where to channel your efforts. But then also personal drivers, which we've discussed before. sometimes in an agency role, you have this client growth target, or even in-house, you have, growth targets. Understanding how individuals are measured can really prevent you or save time in having a conversation and trying to maybe sell a service, which they just don't care about because that's not what they're going to get measured on. If you're talking with a comms professional who is just measured on media coverage, no point selling them your social media team because that's probably handled by somebody else. So you can save a lot of time.
We might have to have another webinar on is PR a support function or a strategic partner is how I'd be arguing it, Simon, but we'll leave that one. We'll leave that one for another day.
Word choice, but I think yes, I agree with you.
Chris, what about you from a government perspective? I mean, what lessons have you learned or what kind of advice would you give for those starting out on that measurement journey?
Probably not so much advice. I still feel we've got a long way to go, but sort of reflecting on things that we've learned along the way. I guess it's a few things. Probably it is something that needs to be budgeted for. We've sort of mentioned it before, and like it costs money to do a lot of these things, and it takes time and effort and resourcing. So perhaps 5 to 10% of our resourcing goes towards making sure that we're able to justify the importance of our work, measure, and know if we're on track. So that's one thing, sort of actually factoring in time and resourcing to do it. I guess another thing is looking at how we're using our measurement and evaluation as a communication sort of piece, really. Is a lot of people are analytical and a lot of people are not as analytical. So I think this is probably a broad statement. I'll say it anyways, that analytical people tend to, I find, tend to congregate towards working on the evaluation and measurement side. They love the data. They love to be able to draw conclusions, see trends, and manipulate figures and do that kind of thing. But that's not everyone. So it's making sure that we're using qualitative data at the same time, or bearing in mind the non-analytical people who we may need to influence. So in a practical sense, we have a range of dashboards that we use to, show the outputs and the outtakes from our work. But I always use qualitative data alongside. And I use it strategically to point my senior leaders who I know they have 20 seconds, the key dot points that I want you to take away from this, and sort of being able to have two sort of types of information together. Something we didn't do initially, but it sort of really boosted once we were able to have that qualitative data with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we're storytellers, right? That should be our strength, to be able to tell that using data. It should give us the confidence to tell that story even more strongly, right?
Absolutely, that's right. I've seen really strong buy-in from our team just recently. So probably over the last 12 to 18 months, we've had a focused piece of work at the National Fire and Eradication Program, where we have funding from all the states from around Australia and the federal government. And we need to be able to demonstrate that this money is being used effectively. And it's working really well at that high level, but probably I'm really happy about is the impact I've seen on my team itself. So introducing this transparency around the work that we're doing, everyone's almost able to see everyone else's work. Everyone's able to see how much work and the quality of the work. Essentially, it really sort of lifted the team. There's sort of a lot of buy-in and nowhere to hide, basically. But people are competitive, and most people are competitive, and they really sort of builds that engagement with work, I find.
Craig, what kind of lessons have you learned, or what would you say, what advice would you be giving about how do you start this conversation about measurement with clients?
Before I do that, I loved what Chris said there around that transparency. In fact, one of I think the 7th principle of the Barcelona principles talks about integrity and transparency. And it's amazing to hear him talk about that in terms of an outcome, in terms of measurement. For me, I suppose if there's one thing I would encourage people to do, and it comes back to what Simon was saying about asking questions or dumb questions, there are probably 5 things I would say, 5 questions before you even start. Even before you start the campaign, while you're brainstorming what you're going to be doing, ask why. Why are you doing this? Does it connect to your business objectives? And where do you need to get the buy-in? At what C-suite level do you need buy-in? Because there's got to be an outcome for that particular area of the business. The second thing is, and absolutely critical, because this goes to the nub of measurement, so who you're trying to reach, which stakeholder groups, and then what do you want them to think, feel, and do? Because if you get that right, that guides your measurement. If you don't know who you're reaching and what you want them to think, feel, or do, how do you measure it? Because then you're measuring the wrong thing. So it's why, who, what, and the last 2 are how and when. So how are you going to measure that? And then when are you going to measure it? At what point in the campaign? So that, for me, out of all the years I've spent, and many years I've spent in PR, it still comes down to that, those simple questions. That's what guides what you measure and how you measure it.
So let's stick on that point, Craig. We've got some questions coming in from the audience, and one of them here kind of talked to that point about what's the relationship between measurement and evaluation to comms strategy? Are there any examples? How do you turn the intangible of communication into tangible? So are there any, I guess that talks to that point you've just made, right? Asking those questions. Are there any examples you could talk to? I mean, I guess you've already spoken to a couple in the crisis comms space.
Yeah, I think that it's work in progress. Well, there are 2 examples. One is a superannuation fund that I work with, where we specifically wanted to own certain conversations. And those conversations are under broad topic areas. And I'll just give one example. Otherwise, if I give too many, I'll give away who the client is. The one example is gender diversity. And so we wanted to own that conversation because it related to their members, but also related to the purpose of that super fund. And so we were able to measure in terms of share of voice on a particular topic, but also then what we measured was the key messages that we wanted to get out in the marketplace. Were those actually landing? Were they being used? So we started layering it across that. And then the next layer was, how was that impacting members? Did members actually have recall about anything to do with gender diversity that the super fund had said? So you start layering it down so that you feed it through. Because as anybody would know who works with superannuation, there's something called, a member benefit. So what's the outcome for the member? Is it benefiting them in some way or another? And then the other one is work in progress. And it's the one I mentioned where we're using your tool, the communication dividend. And so interestingly there, we're starting to see, well, how does this client start taking disparate campaigns across marketing and EDMs and digital and social and PR? And how are we now starting to mesh those together to see, can we be more effective in planning together, in integrating our comms better across those different disciplines, and the outcomes that will drive. So I know we're at early stages in that, but I'm excited about where that's going to go, because too often we operate in silos. Yeah,
right. Chris, what's your comment on that? That bridging that gap between comms strategy and business strategy, right? I guess that's really what the AMEC framework is all about, right?
Yeah, I guess they're almost one and the same thing. What Craig was saying at the beginning there, essentially, I sort of took a note and I said, it's comms planning. We start with what are we trying to achieve? What will success look like? And then how we're going to go about measuring it. And Simon mentioned before, once you have agreement on what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do it and how we know if we get there, it's like all of the issues almost go away. Sort of, there's an agreement. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And this is how we'll know if we're successful. So the comms strategy and the framework, or the measurement and evaluation, are hand in hand and have to be developed side by side. I was thinking of sort of practical examples. I was just looking at the questions there. And so in terms of how we measure some of the intangible or less easily measurable things, and it is through social research, sort of big public opinion surveys. We do an 800-person survey across our area, Southeast Queensland, twice a year, 15-minute phone calls, and from that we're able to measure sort of our 6 key KPIs. It costs a fair bit of money, but that's probably one of the key learnings. You have to spend the money on this, otherwise essentially there's no way of knowing if what you're doing is successful. So the framework aligns things for us. A key little thing that we've sort of built as we've developed our framework, each one is sort of tailored to each team. The one we've developed, we've come out with this nice little outtakes section. We call it our engagement funnel. So this is government related, but we sort of categorize the short-term measurements as awareness, action, or advocacy. So, awareness and action, quite straightforward. In the advocacy space, I've seen a transition in our team. All of a sudden, we're focusing our work on and devoting resources to how we can best get other people to do our work for us. So just that came out of the framework. It was a cultural shift, and now we're like, that's where we spend our time. And all of a sudden the whole team is looking for and celebrating that advocacy pieces that we see, and that was not present in our team before. So an interesting outtake for us.
Simon, I guess I'll ask you the same question, but also I'll jump into another one here. So yeah, if you've got a comment on how do we bridge that business strategy and comms strategy, but another question here as well is, how do we tackle measurement when marketing and comms is in different teams or is kind of separated? I'm not sure if that's the case at McKinsey, but I guess how do you, when comms and marketing and other teams kind of aren't together, how do you tackle that? So I'll give you either of those questions or both if you can.
Yeah. So, I mean, we being my team, we are the marketing and comms function together. We don't use the M word, we don't use the marketing word at McKinsey, but that's effectively what we are. Or as I call it, the custodians of the corporate crayons. Not to play down the roles of any marketers out there. My wife is one, but at the risk of sounding like a broken record and talking about kind of the softer side of things, it is about having those conversations and those relationships with those different people and really understanding what it is they're working towards, and understanding what the common language is. To get really practical and tactical, because sometimes those answers don't suffice, don't look at the 50 things you can measure. What are the 2-3 numbers that are really important? Identify what those are. Then learn the story around it, learn how to tell a story around it. That doesn't mean spinning a yarn or just hiding behind it, like actually talk about the number. But then also have the flexibility. One of the things that I have learned over time is that, you need to be flexible to report one number 1 week or 1 month and then another month if it tells a more compelling story or it's more interesting. As humans, we love new information. We love to learn. And if you're not teaching, if you're not revealing something to your stakeholders, they'll quickly switch off. So that might mean pivoting to something else. And particularly, measuring month on month, quarter to quarter, year on year is really hard when the economic environment, when any environment is stable. Considering everything we've gone through, I would even argue that we got to start again in many regards and just look at shorter time periods when you're measuring, when you're doing comparisons.
Chris, a couple of questions I'll throw to you that have come up here. One's the always present, what's the budget? In terms of percentage, when you're speaking to management about measurement, what percentage of the budget should we be talking about? And then I guess further on that, is there an allocation in your team, I guess, around head hours per team member on measurement to ensure that what they've asked here is that, you're showcasing the results favorably in terms of the data may not tell the story you need it to tell, so you need to spend the time to analyze that data. So yeah, a couple of questions there about budget and I guess time for the team spent on this month in, month out.
I guess I only can sort of answer from a government perspective. Might be different in other areas, but in general, sort of for advertising campaigns, Our expectation is about 10% of our budget is spent on research. So if you're spending $500,000, then 50,000 of that would go towards research, with its focus groups or quantitative studies or some other sort of study if it's a larger budget. But roughly 10% is kind of where we go. In terms of our overall, because we do a lot more than just advertising campaigns, we do a lot of engagement, stakeholder forums, and a heap of different stuff. Probably 5 to 10% of our budget I'd look for in this space. In terms of head hours and people time, I really don't know. I was trying to do the calculation in my head on the spot, but I can't figure it out. I don't have an allocation for people to do it. It's just become part of the culture of the team. It's an expectation, and we do it weekly. So every week we are all contributing to our sort of evaluation work, and then every month, and then every quarter, and then annually. But it's just an expectation. It's not a huge amount of time. Again, like I was actually just talking to someone recently, we're changing the format, and I said, look, I don't think people need to spend more than, half an hour a week on this. We work for 36, 40 hours a week. Half an hour is not unrealistic for everyone in the team. Collectively, it adds up. But that's probably how I'm doing it at the moment. Can't remember what the third part of the question was. I've got two.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, from my perspective on that, I guess what I saw in agency was a lot of time spent on reporting, not necessarily, evaluating and delivering insights, which is the value part, right? So you want to try and spend the time on delivering insights, not just creating a report for the sake of it.
I think if the framework's set up well, the objectives are agreed on, and how you're going to measure them, people know what they need to be measuring, and they become very good at it. So it really streamlines. Initially, it's hard, it's complex, and it's messy. But once my team had been doing it for a few months, and we talk about it in every team meeting, it's a focus for us. We talk about it, and we fine tune things and adjust things. It becomes streamlined, and it's that half an hour that I mentioned is probably a lot more than that, but it's, not sure where I'm going. It's important.
Craig, that 10% number of measurement, spending 10% of the budget on measurements, it's pretty much the kind of general theory of it. Do you think that's a pipe dream in agency, that you get 10% from clients on budget?
Yeah, I hate to put percentages to, every client's different, every campaign's different, what you measure is different. What I would say is there are two elements of measurement. There's the input part of it, which is, the research, setting it up, doing the report. And that's, anybody can do that, right? You can get specialists, you can get people in, you can outsource. The key is the insights. So what do you take out of the stuff that then informs the campaign better or next time, or gives the board or the exec team the output that they want? That's the key. And so too often I see stuff that's just a report. Here it is, because it's like a tick box thing. We measured it, there it is. But in that measurement, did you actually look at that? And often sometimes you need a senior person who's got a lot of experience, or maybe you need somebody from another department who sees things differently. Cognitive diversity is an incredible thing that we don't use enough of. And so having we used 2 data scientists recently, master data science students, to look at some work we had done. What they came up with and their views were so far away from ours, but added so much value that we went, why didn't we think of that in the first place? So there's just one small example. So it's really important to think about, okay, what are the outputs? But then what's the insight you derive from that? That operational piece needs the insight piece to be able to have meaning.
Yeah. I'll throw this question that's come up to all of you, because I think it's a good one. I think one of the challenges with measurement, often the conversations get too high level, too esoteric. But this question is basically, what research methods do you most commonly use to measure and evaluate your activities? So, what are the 2 or 3 ways that you are measuring today? So maybe Simon, if we start with you.
I've often defaulted to percentage changes, growth, particularly if it comes to media, how has it increased? How has it decreased? I think that's something a lot of people can kind of get a hold of. But more and more, I've gone into more marketing territory numbers, almost conversions. How does the work we did convert to real world outcomes? And that's a whole other conversation, a whole other webinar, but basically showing a funnel and, how you can drive awareness down into consideration and then into conversion. And a lot of the conversations we have as a function is that we can get you so far. We can bring the client to the water, but we can't get them to drink. Or if they do drink, we can't see it because the partners are the ones having conversations with the clients. So we can sometimes do a media push or an event push and everyone has a good time. We see the piece in print or online, and that's all we see. That's it. The best outcome, and I've seen this question come up as well, is like, what's the number? It's when a partner comes to you and goes, that article we placed, it led to a conversation. Or as an outcome of that event, I got to have 3 different conversations with these people who I've never spoken with before. Now, how do you set that as a PR team? We want to drive X number of conversations because really it's about the people in the room having the skills and the ability and the time, all these different things to be able to do that. But sometimes the most impactful, interesting, exciting pieces are the things you just don't expect or don't see. So again, have a conversation with stakeholders and say, what was the result of that? What do we do? Should we do it again? Should we not? All these things.
Chris, you've already mentioned a couple, but what are some ways, some methods?
I guess, yeah, so that conversions that Simon was talking about, a lot of we have 6 sort of things that we want people to do on our website so we can directly measure them, which is quick, easy, live data, and we can then manipulate things to try and increase the number of conversions in that space. So online conversions is something that underpins everything that we do, but more recently we've been looking at community sentiment and in particular trust from the community in the work that our program is doing, which is sort of this higher order thing that influences all those conversions. So that measurement of trust is what we do through our social research, and needs to be done in particular ways to get an accurate sort of a reliable measure of trust, something that we don't see change very quickly. But in terms, well, once we put in place our sort of our AMAC framework, that community trust sat right at the top as in terms of one of the impacts or outcomes that we're looking for. So measuring trust underlies everything that we do, really. If people don't have trust in us, then there's only so much we can achieve through our direct marketing channels.
But I like that. There's, trust is obviously much harder to measure, but you've also got simpler things to measure. Google Analytics, right? Everyone's got it. So it's easy, it's fast, it's there, it's real time, as you say.
Yeah.
Craig, what about you? What do you see as the most, common methods?
For me, and I'll use an example to illustrate this. For me, benchmarking and Simon and Chris have both mentioned this to certain degrees. Benchmarking is key. So it's being able to see a shift in whatever it is you're measuring. So ascertain what's your hypothesis up front, establishing the benchmark, and then measuring it. So, for example, I've been running what we call a perception survey for an asset management company for 14 years. I've done it every second year for 14 years. We've just actually finished the last one. So it's the 7th one. We're able to track over 7 years. And we're only speaking to 25 people, the chief investment officers of the super funds and the intermediaries and the research houses. We're able to track how that asset management house has done on a number of scales. And the good thing is that then drives our comms. It changes the way they communicate, changes the content. And so the good thing with them is they actually make the changes. So they take the insights, people say X, Y, and Z, and you get, and then they actually make the changes. So next year or the next time you do it, you can see whether we've actually shifted So benchmarking, if you can establish a benchmark on whatever it is you're measuring, is incredibly powerful because you can see how you travel.
All right, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I'll do a wrap-up question. If there's something you wish you had done differently with the benefit of hindsight on your measurement journey, what would have that been? Craig, I'll start with you.
I hate to admit this, well, I'm in a measurement webinar. I'm about to say something, you shoot me now. I ignored measurement for so long in my early career. I hate to admit it, I did. I just ignored it. I just got on with the work, and we just did it. And I suppose in those days, when I started in PI, guess what? We had like hard clippings that we'd fax to people. That tells you how old I am. But so, yeah, measurement was a kind of like, that thing that you did at the end if you needed to. I've realized, obviously, in time that was really short-sighted, but I was young and I had no idea. So, it's so much more sophisticated now. You can really measure what you need to measure. And I'm loving the new tools and the ways you can do it. And they're just such smart people out there that you can work with. It's quite stimulating,
Chris.
Look, hard to pinpoint, but probably getting external help. So I had done a lot of research myself and my team had come up with different ideas, but once we brought in someone to help workshop the ideas and put some logic around it, it really started to become powerful. So that was Deb Camden from the Communication Dividend, and she sort of worked with our team over a few months actually, and it really took shape. We achieved more in that sort of 3-month period than probably we ever had in the past. So should have done it earlier.
Simon.
Very quickly, simplify. We've tried to, in various roles, build frameworks and all these different things we're measuring, and yada, yada, yada. Just really simplify what is you measuring and why. Again, we've talked about the 2-3 numbers, what are they, instead of the 50. And then the honest conversations. When I've myself or one of my team has been that person spending hours on a report, putting your hand up and just going, does this matter? Who's reading it? What? Why? And then also having a conversation with your stakeholders and saying, we are investing this much time in doing this, which means it's taking us away from this. Are you cool with that? Sometimes I'll say yes, and I'm like, okay, cool. Otherwise, sometimes they go, oh, I didn't realize that. And again, you have a really good conversation.
All right, thank you so much for your time, Chris, Simon, and Craig. Probably especially Simon, who's actually on paternity leave and has a little one there. So going above and beyond. I've certainly got a lot out of it. I think there's some great lines. If it didn't happen, if you didn't measure it, it didn't happen. Think of measurement as a handcuff or a key is a kind of nice way to think about it. So hopefully everyone out there has enjoyed this webinar. Again, thank you to the speakers. If you have, there's a lot more Measurement Month activity happening throughout November with the PRIA. Tomorrow, my podcast, Smoke Signal, will drop a conversation with Katie Payne, who's been writing and talking about measurement for the past 3 decades. It's a really interesting chat with her from the US. So have a look out for that. We've also got another webinar later in the month with a group called the Dublin Conversations, who's a group out of Ireland looking to revamp how we practice PR, and they're launching, as part of Measurement Month, a new measurement framework. So keep an eye out for that through the PRIA. Thank you all for your time, and we hope to see you at more Measurement Month events.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.